Thank you all for being here. I know most of you, or know of you, or have heard your voices. I want to thank Jill and Linda for organizing this, and I think it's your house, Jan. I want to thank Jan for hosting this. Jan and I have something in common, and that is her sister, Joan Bohorfish, who was a student at Lewis and Clark College, graduate student, but tragically, unfortunately, she died in early death. She was the epitome of what we call a public intellectual, an activist, smart, concerned, a woman of conscience, a lot of energy, and a lot of courage. But she worked at Wilson High School, not Wilson, but West Lynn. She's gone. She's not with us, so I want to remember that. Again, thank you very much for being here. I know you could be doing all kinds of things, like working on your stock portfolio, or taking your pets to a dentist or psychiatrist, or you know, shopping, looking for deals, or
that second or third job to make ends meet.
Yes, or having having working to make ends meet. So, as pointed out, it is amazing. I have been this is going to be slightly autobiographical, but I don't want to dwell on myself or education alone. In 2002, early 2002, I was sitting in Rogers Hall in my office, looking out at Mount Hood, and this was March 2002, just 2 months after the Taliban were ejected from power. Got a call from a fellow Afghan American who is a Ph.D. in literature, was appointed Minister of Higher Education. He said, "We don't know each other, but I've heard about you, and will you come and help me?" I had been appointed Minister of Higher Education, and I was off that semester, so I said, yes, I can get on a plane in 2 or 3 days. So I was born and raised in Afghanistan and finished high school in Afghanistan, elementary in the village, middle and high school in the capital, and beyond that, all of my education has been at American institutions. This is just to give you an idea. At the American University of Beirut, and I'm not throwing names, New York and California, and ended up at Lewis and Clark College 40 years ago, until last August. I have always gone back. My mother still lives in Afghanistan, in fact in the village. She sees no reason why she should leave where she was born and raised. I have sisters and a brother and their families living there. But apart from family connections, I feel an obligation, and even more so now, to go and do something and make a difference, or to learn about the conditions there, come back and share with fellow Americans. I am fluent both in Pashto and Farsi, and those are the languages where I teach. Now, in those two languages, people don't know English well enough to, to study, read, conduct research, and so forth. So I first went to Afghanistan in March of 2002, and the country indeed was a wasteland in every sense of that word. And when I served there I was advisor to the Ministry of Higher Education, and did everything from the minister's speeches to trying to arrange one bathroom in the ministry building that foreigners could use, plumbing and water and so forth. So I did everything, and I, of course, came back at the end of the 2 or 3 months to my job at Lewis and Clark. But then the minister kept asking me to go back, and I kept going. For the first 6 years, I was advisor. I hate the word consultant, and I certainly have not been associated with the military or the CIA or any corporation or the contractors, and my title there now is really visiting professor. So for the first 6 years, I was advisor, doing handyman for the ministry. Did everything we could to restart the higher education system. And then the minister and I saw that the government in general in the ministry were becoming like criminal syndicates, mafia organizations. So we both left. He's now with the American University of Afghanistan, and I have been going back and forth, helping in conjunction with the University of Massachusetts, Amherst. So for the last 6 years, we left the ministry, and I was asked if I would teach in one master's degree program. And this tells you something. There are some 4,000 university professors in Afghanistan. Only 5% have doctorate degrees, and 35% have master's degrees. 60% of the university professors in this year of 2013 only have bachelor degrees from their own universities. This is not even seen as an issue. The same can be said for the school system, where only a fifth of the school teachers, first grade through 12th grade, are considered to be barely qualified. 80% unqualified, underqualified. So you see people with bachelor's degrees teaching even in med school or in engineering or any field that you can think of. And it's a very big problem because the cycle of mediocrity sort of continues at all levels. And yet the international community, it has been there for 12 years now and has spent billions and billions of dollars, of course $1 trillion on the military. They have not done much actually to do this. For example, the government now can spend $518 per year per university student. That is for everything from electricity to salaries to classrooms to water to you name it. And the government spends only $50 per year per child from K through 12th. That includes all the expenses. So this gives you an idea. And only 1% of the university-age population are in the universities. There's now an explosion of private universities. 5 years ago, there was no private university. Now there are close to 80. And private there means different. It's not like Lewis and Clark College or Willamette or other. Private there means if you have money or you borrow money, you rent a building and you put a billboard saying we offer BAs and master's degrees in this and that field. People come and pay money, and then they go and work, and at the end of the 1 or 2 years, they come back and they are given certificates. There's no quality control, either in the public institutions or the private institutions. So I have been going back every year for at least one semester for the last 12 years, sometimes for 2 semesters, sometimes full year. As I said, I worked for Lewis and Clark for 40 years, both undergraduate and grad. And last year, at one point, and if you have been to Afghanistan, it's very hard not to get involved with the country, or with the people especially, if you know the languages. It has been said the Afghans make the best of friends and also the worst of enemies. So try not to cross an Afghan. But if you want a true friendship, you befriend Afghans. So since then, when I first went there and saw, I could travel then, and saw the conditions, I have felt very strongly that if my life is to mean anything, I think I need to spend it more and more there. And last August, I finally decided, and I couldn't do it because I had a full-time job here and a full-time job there. In a sense, I had 2 jobs. Full-time jobs are 2 occupations. And it gets a little tiring, you spend 20 hours on the plane alone between Portland and Kabul. Those 20 hours can wear you out. It takes weeks actually to recover from the jet lag. But I feel very strongly now that I think one of you said something that the remainder of my life I think should be spent someplace like Afghanistan to see if I can make a very small difference. Not a big one, but a very small difference. So for the last 6 years, I've been teaching in this one program where we bring, by we I mean the program of course is approved by the Ministry of Higher Education. It's funded by the USAID, Agency for International Development. And it's being implemented by the University of Massachusetts, Amherst, and part of it is implemented by Indiana University. And so I've been sort of associated with the University of Massachusetts for 6 years, where we bring 22 university instructors, teacher education faculty, 11 men, 11 women. That was one of my conditions, that I would only work with a program if there's genuine equity and commitment to gender equity. So we have 22 people, 11 men and 11 women from the 17 different institutions in the country. They spend 4 semesters there and then have a variety, a program like Lewis and Clark teacher education program. Some content, some pedagogy, and some electives. We give them a master's degree, they go back and teach in their institutions. And then this last year, about 6 months ago, or a year ago, USAID, the American Embassy and the Ministry of Higher Ed said, we need a program to sort of train mid-level career civil servants and also people who work for NGOs or civic organizations to get master's degrees and advance their skills and training and knowledge. So there's a program in public policy and administration. Now I have never taught a course in either administration. In fact, I don't like administration or administrators. But you do what you need there, what needs to be done. So I have been teaching in both programs now, which is to say that over the last 6 years or so, I have designed maybe 7 or 8 different courses, from research methods to public policy to foundations of education, you name it. And teaching there is much harder than teaching here, because there it means I have to find the material in English, of course, because there's nothing really available in the local languages. I have to select the material. We have a team of translators. I give it to these people. They translate them to Dari and Pashto, and then I have to edit because they have problems in translation. And then you try to produce the material and teach in the local languages. So teaching there is even more exhausting than it would be here. It's a lot of hard work, but it's incredibly gratifying. So I have gone every year for 12 years, and I'll be leaving again. I returned here July 17th, and I'm leaving for Kabul next Tuesday. Classes begin on Saturday. So over the last 12 years, I have seen some development, but I have seen a lot of underdevelopment. If Samir Amin, those of you who know the name, and of course Naomi Klein were sitting here, they will be smiling and doing this and say yes, because Afghanistan really is a classic case study in deliberate underdevelopment and deliberate dependency on foreigners. So for example, in terms of the economy, 90% of Afghanistan's economy is dependent on the presence of foreigners. And those foreigners include people like me, an academic, a lot of CIA, a lot of special forces, a lot of drone people, a lot of the military, etc., etc. 90%. So if the foreigners left, everybody tells us, the World Bank, and I know this, the economy will collapse. This after the world community has spent about $60 billion on development, quote unquote, but development means that $60 billion, half of it has been spent on training the security forces, the other half is spent on, quote, development and reconstruction, but of that only 8% is spent by the Afghan government. Most of the money that goes in goes out. There have been thousands of, quote, consultants who actually have taken out $10 billion since 2002. You won't believe the privileges, the wages, the conditions, the holidays, and so forth. These are, there's no need for me to document, but I'm very happy to sort of give you references if you wanted to or were interested. More than half of the labor force is unemployed right now. Most people are poor. Afghanistan is still the source of the largest number of refugees and asylum seekers and people who escape the country. At this point, anyone who can is getting out, and anyone who can get their money out is taking it out. So the economy is on life support. This is a country where when I was a child, it took care of itself. Now it has become totally dependent on foreigners, including foreign prostitutes, I will have to say, or liquor, or the military, or contractors, or do-gooders, or whatever. The country was self-sufficient in food production. Now it's a net importer of food. Everything like that, from socks to even the chadari. It's interesting that the chadari, the burqa, or you call it burqa, it's wrong, but chadari, which was made in Afghanistan by Afghan tailors and provided, of course, thousands of jobs, now is imported from China because you can buy the same thing for half the price. So the Chinese, including my shoes here, the Chinese actually have sort of invaded, a massive invasion of the economy and also sort of culturally in a very subtle way, using both the soft power. 60% of the economy is sort of informal, that is to say the government has no idea. For example, the Ministry of Higher Education, which in a sense actually sort of is to lead the project, the higher education project, the minister has no idea how much money comes through this project from the USAID, where the money goes and where it's spent. Because they dare not ask the Americans who manage the project, and the Americans are not interested in telling the ministry, even though we meet with them almost every day and we teach, we work for them. So the economy basically is controlled by foreigners. And in terms of all these indexes, the Human Development Index, poverty, per capita income, hospital beds, calorie intake, child mortality, maternal mortality, etc., stability, threats, violence, etc., the country, corruption, the country is at the very bottom, according to these negative indexes, and it's at the very top of the negative indexes like corruption. The country is not corrupt. The government is corrupt. The government is corrupt because we made them corrupt. We, by mean Washington. The government and the CIA. You probably heard President Karzai bragging actually at a press conference when there were revelations here in the American press that his whole cabinet, his staff, even his family have been on the CIA pay for years and years. And he said, yes, of course, we get money from the CIA and we thank them. He said this at a press conference in Helsinki. But he said, but we also get money from the Iranian intelligence and from the Pakistani ISI and several others. And this is a fact. So foreigners actually taught them, and they forced, in the military contracts, if you're interested in this, you can read John Sopko. John Sopko, who is the investigator for the Pentagon, his reports are very revealing. And it tells you about waste, mismanagement, corruption, and how the Americans in the foreign forces perpetuate it. So the economy is in crisis, and the country, as I said, is on life support. And if that life support is removed, I don't know what will happen. Worse than Egypt, maybe? Worse than Syria? Worse than Yemen? Worse than Somalia? Worse than Gaza? Or whatever. Militarily, the situation is a stalemate. This year, I know this from experience because, I travel every now and then. I understand people, I listen to them, I talk to them. People would tell me things that they will not tell other foreigners and so forth, but also other evidence indicate that this year has been the most violent, the most deadly, the most problematic, the most insecure, the most turbulent over this period of what is called Operation Enduring Freedom. Operation Enduring Freedom has become Operation Enduring Occupation. I don't like to call it war because no Afghan government has ever declared or attacked war, attacked the United States, and hasn't declared war against anybody. 9/11 was a heinous crime, but the Taliban government had very little to do with it. I insist, and now it's declassified material. They tried everything they could to avert an Allied invasion and attack, but Washington was not interested in that. The president then and our man, Dr. Khalilzad, was not interested because the plan to actually invade Afghanistan and attack it that was decided upon the previous summer. It had nothing to do with 9/11. 9/11 was a very good excuse to launch the attack and invasion. But at this point, as I said, the war is a stalemate, which is to say that the United States and its 58 allies have lost the war. And that's why they want to leave. But they will not leave entirely. So while there's talk about withdrawal next year, at the same time, there was a partnership agreement signed between Washington and Kabul, which guarantees the U.S. 9 major bases in the country. And it also there's talk about how many American special forces, troops, and so forth will remain there. And right now there are 110,000 troops from 48 different countries, even countries like New Zealand, or Norway, or Jordan, or the United Arab Emirates, which have nothing to do with Afghanistan. These countries have never been attacked by anybody, and the Afghans have never had anything to do with quote terrorism and all that. But the country was invaded. You may recall, we were told, that Washington wanted to fight terrorism, bring development and prosperity to Afghanistan, liberate the Afghan women, eradicate the drug industry, bring peace and stability to the region and all that. These were the major alibi and promises that were made to the American public and the world community. And the Afghans, none of those have been fulfilled, in fact. Everyone has been violated. And so the Americans and its allies have been forced to withdraw, but there will be 9 bases. And at the same time, next month, they will open the second largest defense ministry in the world, next to the Pentagon. So it's being built right across the palace, the presidential palace. In other words, the second largest ministry of defense in the poorest country in the world. It's sort of strange. But also what most people don't know, that in addition to the 110,000 troops, there are 120,000 contractors. People like from, Blackwater, which is called academia now, I think, which is interesting. Blackwater, DynCorp, retired police officers, people from Nepal, people from Argentina, people from the Arab countries, people from everywhere, contractors, who don't just build maybe roads, but they're also the ones who are actually running the drones. And they do intelligence work, and they do the fighting. And those are not mentioned. So the contractors are, a third of them are Afghan, a third of them American, and a third of them are from third countries. And they're not mentioned. So that was the military situation. I talked about the economy. Education, I think education, although in terms of numbers, there are 7 or 8 million children, K through 12, in schools, nominally. But for every child who's in school, there is a child who's not in school, because there are no schools. No schools, no teachers, no textbooks, no facilities. And the children who go to school, this is Minister of Education speaking, Mr. Wahab, half of the schools have no building, which is to say that, and now in some places it's 115 degrees. And in the winter it can be 50 degrees minus. So when it's either cold or very hot, or when it's raining and these people are studying under a tree or someplace, by a wall, school is dismissed. School today officially means 3 hours of instruction per day, because all schools in the cities operate 3 shifts. Every school operates 2 shifts at least. Very few schools operate 1 shift. So 3 shifts a day, that means 3 hours of school, and maybe 4 or 5 months a year. That is school. So quality is really a problem. I want to take a minute. I will tell you about the women. You all have heard about the country producing more heroin this year than, say, the previous year or the previous year. So drugs have gone up because it's a third of the GDP. The country's $17 billion GDP. And people at the very top are involved in the drug, both the Afghans and, of course, the international and regional mafia. But in terms of women, girls, only 13% of the girls, 13% of the girls, school-age girls, go to school. Of those, 4% finish high school. And of those, maybe less than 1% can continue their studies in some kind of a university. the same for everything. So in the cities, you do see women now. You know, half of my students are in both programs are women. You see women going to work, working for the government, working for foreign organizations, working all kinds of things, you know, and not very few of them would wear the chadari, but they have to wear a scarf. But the vast majority of the women live, exist, and suffer the way what Malala Yousafzai probably told you. She's right on, you know, she tells it like it is, and that's why I fear, you know, someday she may not be with us, because if you speak like that, you threaten people, and bad things can happen to you. The political system is very interesting. You know, when the Taliban were in the process of being ejected in December 2001, the US, UN, and the European Union convened this meeting in Bonn in December of 2001, and wanted to decide what kind of a government should the country have and what kind of a constitution. They invited these warlords who are known and were known criminals and assassins and butchers and thieves, all of them. This is a fact, because these people, you see their wealth, you see their private prisons, you see their power, you see, you know, their privileges. So the US, UN, and the European Union convened this meeting and invited certain from the Afghan diaspora from throughout the world. You know, Europe, this country, Southeast Asia, and so forth. And first they tried to take a vote as to who could be a good president. And I don't know if you're Afghan, and I don't know if you know Mr. Sattar Sirat, who is Uzbek. When they took votes, Sattar Sirat won the vote, the majority of the votes 2 or 3 times. But Mr. Khalilzad and these other Americans said, but he's not a Pashtun, he's a Uzbek. We need a Pashtun president nominally because the Pashtuns are the majority, and the Pashtuns have always been at least the king and nominated, so we need a Pashtun to appease the Pashtun, but a Pashtun, as they said, that you can work with. So they found Mr. Karzai, who was a very ordinary man. Actually, I've spoken to him on 3 occasions. On one occasion, I even was stupid enough to go with the minister, and I went in his car with him from one point to another point. From the palace to Bagibala. So they said, aha, Mr. Karzai. Mr. Karzai is very good, and he can be quite, you know, slimy, speaks English. So Mr. Karzai was made president, and the other power was sort of apportioned. Recall that Afghanistan was experiencing a civil war prior to 2001. The civil war began, you can say, maybe even in 1973, or it began in 1977, for sure. It continued between the North and the South, what was called the Northern Alliance, and the South, synonymous with the Taliban or the... So there's a civil war underway, and then the Americans and its allies come in, and they decide in this conference as to who is going to be Minister of Justice, Minister of Interior, the Prime Minister, the President, etc. And it so happens that power, that is to say most cabinet positions, were taken by the Northern Alliance. You know, there's no need to name the people or the ministries. Now there are 27 ministries for a poor country. You know, we have, I think, 14 or 15 cabinet positions in this country. So power was given to these people, but also in the Bonn conference it was said that the Northern Alliance forces will not move into Kabul. Kabul will be sort of neutral, managed by the ISAF, the International Security Assistance Force. But the Northern Alliance people, of course, were smart. They had a plan. So they moved into Kabul and they took the position, the ministries, and those people are, in a way, still in power. So since December 2001, the international community has thrown all of its support behind this government, which was conceived, designed, put together, selected, imposed, in fact brought by a German plane from Bonn to Kabul. And then a year or 2 later they put the constitution together and concentrated all the power in the presidency. So there's a president, but there's no vice president even. And Karzai, it has been said, appoints even the local police because you have to make deals with Karzai because of elections, because of the crime and criminality, drugs, etc., etc. And so what has happened politically is we sort of have this puppet regime which has been empowered, both in terms of money but also in terms of military, guns. We know, for example, that Ismail Khan from Iraq has his own army. He's Minister of Water and Power. That's why there's no water or power. Because he was a Mujahid leader. Maybe he was a good Mujahid, but he has no business. But he was the governor of Herat. In a way, he was the king of Herat. And so Karzai somehow brought him to Kabul. But he governs Herat by remote control. He has an army, for example. The same would say the governor of Balkh, the same with other northern people. So we have protected and supported and funded this government, which is corrupt, inefficient, ineffective, illegitimate from top to bottom. And this is blunted, of course, and there were 2 or 3 elections for the parliament, you know, and provincial councils, 2 elections for the president. There will be another election next April, although there are signs that Karzai is trying to sort of prevent that from happening. Hence, one problem toward peace and reconciliation. But that's the government. And so people, there are a lot of very bright, decent, patriotic, honest Afghans in the diaspora, but also in Afghanistan. But because they're not part of this criminal syndicate, and they're not part of the mafia, but also they don't believe in any kind of sectarianism, they are on the margins. And if you're too outspoken, things can happen to you. If nothing else, you may lose the electricity, and then it somehow becomes difficult to reconnect your house to the electric line that is right over there. So this is what's happening, and this is why I say the same with the economic situation. It's all consumerism. You can almost find anything that you would be looking for here in Kabul now, if you have the money. But the international community has not created any kind of productive employment. So instead of Afghanistan has countless rivers, fast rivers where you could build small dams and big dams and actually sell electricity to all of your neighbors. But the country, and it's because of Ismail Khan, the Minister of Water and Supply, they import electricity from Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, and Turkmenistan and pay hundreds, and this is the USAID. Instead of spending those hundreds of millions of dollars building dozens of dams, they're spending that money on fuel and on electricity, giving it to Tajiks, Uzbeks, and Turkmens. So it's very hard to make this sort of a subject for conversation because no one is interested in this kind of thing. So the economy is all, as I said, consumerism. And one way to see that is that even garbage has changed. When we were little, there was almost no garbage in Kabul because everything was used up and recycled in the natural way. Now, because the municipality is almost non-existent, there are mountains of garbage every few blocks. And if you look at the garbage, which is what I do from time to time, and if it weren't for the little boys and men and women, the scavengers, and the nomads who herd their flock of sheep and goats through the streets of Kabul. So on a main street you will see, let's say, 100, 200 goats or sheep, or sometimes cows, donkeys, people going through the garbage. And so they sort of use up eat what they can. But the garbage is interesting. It's like the kind of garbage we will see here. Styrofoam, throwaway stuff, prepackaged things and so on. And foreigners are directly contributing to this because that's what we encourage. Even in my guest house, for example, people would order pizza. And it's delivered, and there's a little pizza packaged, several times, and we eat the pizza and throw the stuff away, and it adds to the garbage. And of course, it consumes energy and so forth. So that's the economy. And I want to finish up so that we have enough time for questions and discussion. You have heard a lot about peace talks, on again, off again. But the problem of Afghanistan is it's not just a domestic problem. It does have domestic underpinnings, but it also is related to the region, in particular Iran and Pakistan. But it's also global now, which is to say, Earthlink. Someone gave me an article the other day about Afghanistan's mines. in minerals. It is true. Afghanistan is incredibly rich in resources: oil, gas, gold, silver, lithium, uranium, coal, iron, you name it. It's estimated that it's worth $1 to $3 trillion of these resources. So, and some people have said that it's called the resource curse, if you know, like blood diamond. And I keep saying that unless and until there's a new and different kind of government, you can even bring America's wealth here, there will still be massive poverty and misery and underdevelopment. Because, as I said, more money is leaving. Last year, for example, $4.5 billion left in cash and suitcases through the Kabul airport alone. You can take any amount of money and no one will stop you. And people are taking money. And that's why all of this aid that has come, there's very few signs of it. There are no signs of, the highways, the schools, the dams, the, whatever, factories, you name it. So there is, but as I said, the U.S. and allies realize that they have lost the war, and they're looking for a face-saving way to leave. But of course, as it has been said many, many times by the State Department and Dunford, our commander-in-chief now, it was said, of course, by Petraeus and Allen. You remember Petraeus and Allen?
It's a general's graveyard.
It is, in fact, because the previous generals also were sort of removed from their positions. But what was amazing about General Allen is, and Petraeus, when the Pentagon did their own investigation, they said that they didn't see anything improper with General Allen writing 35,000 emails in romantic emails in 18 months. And the Pentagon said that there was nothing improper about that. Anyway, so there have been these talks about talks, and it looks like the Americans are willing to do almost anything, whether it's a deal with the Taliban, whether it's bisecting the country, whether it's balkanizing the country, whether it's bribing the Taliban, whatever it is, or bribing Karzai and the other parties. The Americans would like to sort of get out and find an excuse. But the Americans also, I think, will have to, the American government, that is, say, the military, industrial, intelligence, congressional complex, will someday have to answer to the American public. What about these 2,300 Americans and $1 trillion, and tens of thousands actually maimed, and countless Americans maimed psychologically forever? As you know, there are more suicides amongst the Afghan war veterans than are killed in Afghanistan. Many of them, some of them by their own Afghan counterparts, called green on blue. So the talks, they were supposed to be, it looks like the Americans are talking secretly to the Taliban, but you also have to, consider Pakistani interests in Pakistani agenda. They don't really want a free Afghanistan, and they don't want an independent nationalist government. Iran does not want a free Afghanistan, and Iran would not leave Afghanistan alone as long as there are Americans. And Americans have said it again and again that they want to stay in that region, and not just because of Afghanistan's resources, but also because of Central Asia and the Caspian Sea. And I have been to both to Kazakhstan and Turkmenistan, and can see the oil and gas and how that would be important as we enter energy wars. And as long as the Chinese are there, having the largest contract, copper mine, $4.5 billion, and as long as they make even the Chowdhuris, the Americans will not leave. And as long as we have the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, NATO will continue to be involved in that part of the world. So, and there's supposed to be this election next April, but as I said, there are all kinds of maneuverings. One cannot really quite be sure that there will be elections. So whether the elections take place or not, I'm afraid something like what happened in Egypt today will happen in Afghanistan. And so when you leave your house in the morning, man or woman, adult or child, you really don't know if you will be home alive in one piece at the end of the day. This is what my students tell me all the time. And yet we try to teach and learn under these conditions. So thank you. So So make comments, ask questions, disagree, whatever you would like.
Yeah, that's what this time period is for. And I wanted to ask the first question, which is, could you tell us a little bit more about who the fighting forces are in Afghanistan right now? Because someone asked me that. They said, who's fighting who? And I know, of course, that we still have drone strikes, and we have
500 of them last year.
So can you talk about the different fighting forces that are involved?
It's very complicated. Right now, the Afghan situation has become very, very complicated. Just to say it's these fanatic medieval Taliban not liking modernism or women or Karzai or the Americans, that's too simple. The Taliban, of course, are a major segment of the population, and they coincide with the Pashtuns mostly, although I know that there are non-Pashtun Talibs too. And there are a lot of people even with three-piece suits actually who are in mind and attitudes are Talibs in a way. So it's a Taliban fighting the government and anyone who works for the government, and Taliban fighting foreigners, any foreigner from any country. So even I am not safe, and I'm not allowed to exit that door alone without a bodyguard. I can't go anywhere without a bodyguard. I'm an Afghan, I can dress, I can speak like them. So it's the Taliban versus the government, and anyone who works for the government, especially the military or intelligence, is a target, or high level, you know.
National security forces, what are they?
The intelligence, the Afghan National Security Force, which is interesting because, you know, at one point we had 140,000 international security assistance force, NATO, American. There are 350,000 Afghan National Army and Afghan police and Afghan intelligence. In other words, there are about 500,000 people with the most modern, sophisticated weapons, and they keep telling us that there are maybe 20,000 Taliban and maybe 75 Al-Qaeda. 75. This is done for speaking. Which raises sort of a question, you know, 500,000 army with all this paraphernalia not being able to defeat 20,000 Talibs who wear sandals and, you know, these funny looking. So, but there are also, you know, there are the drug mafia. They don't want peace, stability, or a strong government, obviously. And then you have the land mafia, you have the timber mafia, you have the human traffickers. And some of them are in government, in fact. They could be, you know, vice president, or they could be minister, or they could be governor, they could be anybody. They could be the most pious-looking cleric. You probably read, I don't know if you read, but members of the parliament importing liquor. You know, liquor is kind of hard to find. So that's why I hadn't had a drink in 4 months. It just isn't there, and it's too cumbersome. So, this Taliban, but it's also these interest groups, vested interests. But also, we know that Pakistan in particular, the ISI, Inter-Services Intelligence, they send people. A lot of the suicide bombers are Pakistanis, or Afghans who were born and raised and brainwashed in Pakistan. We know that Iran, I know in fact, because I know that Iran is deeply involved in Afghanistan, using the soft power, like establishing universities, funding radio stations, funding television stations, funding, you know, schools, funding charitable organizations. So, or there are, as I said, people who want to embarrass this particular minister or governor or this particular group. So it is very complicated, but I think essentially it's the Taliban versus the government and the foreigners. Yes, first.
Is the U.S. still trying to build that pipeline?
Yes. Some people have said the pipeline is also TAPI, T-A-P-I. As you know, when President Lincoln Clinton, yes, I was alive when President Lincoln was alive. I remember him. Clinton actually, UNOCAL, wanted to build that pipeline connecting Turkmenistan through southwestern Afghanistan to the port of Gwadar, and then, you know, on to India, Pakistan, and the rest of the world. And Clinton brought a whole delegation of Taliban to this country and met with them in the State Department. They were in Los Angeles. In Los Angeles, UNOCAL even asked its receptionist to wear a sort of a scarf over their head. so it would not offend the Taliban. And then the bids came down to Unocal and Bridas, an Argentinian company. And Bridas offered a better deal. The Taliban gave the contract to the Argentinian company Bridas instead of Unocal. Some people say that this angered Washington quite a bit. But the idea of the pipeline, and this was one reason, and the idea of the pipeline now, it's just a matter of months to begin. Now it's Turkmenistan, Pakistan, Afghanistan, and India, TAPI. The Asian Development Bank is going to fund the project. It's going to be about 1,000 miles, and it's going to connect Turkmenistan with, again, the port of Gwadar. They're working on that now, but security concern, I think, is sort of delaying. It's supposed to start any moment, but that is a very serious and important consideration. I think it has something to do with the presence of NATO and American forces. Yeah. Yes.
If the United States troops do leave,
Yeah.
and let's say most of the contractors also leave,
Yes.
that's going to, as you mentioned, make a big dent in the economy. What do you see happening in that eventuality? Will Afghanistan renew its civil war, for example?
Yeah.
In other words, in a way, I'm asking, is occupation a lesser evil than what would come with a withdrawal of the United States from Afghanistan?
Yeah, that's a very good and very important issue and question. Many people, foreign and Afghans, people who think about and what might happen after April next year, April 4th or 5th. You know, first there's people are not sure if there will be elections, and people are not sure if Washington might even want an election between Karzai and Washington, because you have to have this chaos and turmoil and, you know, upheaval to justify the presence of the NATO American forces, but also to justify a very heavy armed army. I want to make a comment on the Afghan so-called Afghan National Army, Afghan police and the intelligence. There's no Afghan National Army. What you have is actually a sectarian army, a sectarian police force, and a sectarian intelligence. And the Americans have known this, and they train them. They work with them every day. They have known this, that the war will begin with the army amongst different ethnic groups, the Pashtun, the Tajiks, the Uzbeks, the Hazaras, and so forth. Mostly probably the Pashtun versus everybody else. So if you look at the, and also it's a mercenary army. We pay for the Afghan army, just as we pay for the so-called American professional army. It's a mercenary army. So people are very worried and concerned what might happen. And also, I have to say, there's a lot of bad blood. The different ethnic groups, as I said, I can see things, I can hear things, people will tell me things. Although the younger people are finally would like to sort of build the country, you know, and make a country. Right now, we don't have a country. We don't have a nation. We don't have even a capital. Capital itself is segmented like Iraq, like Baghdad. You know, you have the Hazaras living in this area, the Panjshiris living in that area, the Pashtuns living in this area, the Tajiks living in that area. The original Kabulis have disappeared. You always hear people, where are the original Kabulis, where everyone got along, so to speak. So many people fear, there are more than 100 political groups and parties. Some have been registered and recognized, others have not. Some of them are talking about forming coalitions and really having an election. At the same time, just in the last 2 months, for example, we saw the Karzai appointed governors from 3 provinces, Jawzjan, Takhar, and one other, kicked out by the locals. They said, this man shouldn't be our governor, we want someone from our, which is to say, our ethnic governor. So things like that, and Karzai could not prevail. He had to, you know, the governor escaped, and he had to send somebody else. So, but it also, people know, I mean, this occupation, I think Afghanistan's problem, the reason why there has really been no development, economic, political, cultural, social, and I want to say that you can rebuild a bridge or a school or a highway, but the culture is going to be very, very difficult. I mean, the criminalization of the entire society and the gangsterization of society, the distrust, the paranoia, you know, the hostility, the animosity, the revenge, you know, the struggle for the goodies, the struggle for whatever it is, whether it's a university admission or a scholarship or a ministry. It's very intense and it's fierce. And so, but that's because over the last 12 years, the foreigners and the Afghan government paid no attention to rebuild the society, the institutions, the culture, the political system, or the economy. I mean, the emphasis was on fighting and military victory and people staying alive. So Karzai now is desperately trying to sort of project himself as the man, you know, who saved Afghanistan and secured some kind of a future for Afghanistan. But I don't know if that will happen. So what I'm trying to say is that it's really open-ended. You could have a civil war, a real bloody civil war, and there seems to be a sign of that. Both within the government, the civilian part of the government, in the military, and also in the population. Or for some reason, miraculously, maybe sanity could prevail and you could have election. A normal election, you know, where somebody would be elected and so forth. Or the cover of the country could simply be divided between North and South. The Pashtuns and the non-Pashtuns, and this is talked about, even by some Deputy Secretary, Robert Blake. You know, it has been talked about subdividing the country, and I think Pakistan and Iran would go for that option. So we have no idea what will happen. Yes?
I know it's very hard to understand even the present, let alone predict the future, but how capable are the Taliban of maturing, of being more inclusive, ultimately as the most powerful force in Afghanistan, spearheading the development of a more inclusive or all-inclusive society, or is that just totally...
No, it's a very good question, and I'm sure the Taliban leadership, if they have any sense, after watching on television what happened in Egypt today, for example, should be thinking, you know, and just like the Muslim Brotherhood and this man, you know, in Egypt, I think the Egypt situation is very instructive, or should be, for all of the Muslim countries. So this I know, for example, that some of the Taliban members now are in the government. They're actually in the so-called High Peace Council, Independent High Peace Council, which was appointed by Karzai. 2 or 3 of their ministers live in Kabul, for example. They have schools now in Kabul for girls, where everyone from the doorwoman all the way to the principal is a woman. They even opened the university now. It's opened and funded by the Taliban for women only in Kabul. And, you know, they issued these communiques, if they are to be believed, that, you know, they want an inclusive government. They're not interested. They keep saying, you know, they will give safe passage to the foreigners. They will not let anyone attack any country from Afghanistan. You know, these, I mean, they have been saying these things are on record, that they want to develop, and they use the internet, you know, they use modern equipment and so forth, and I keep hearing that there's a new generation of Taliban, one very smart and savvy and worldly, but there's also a segment that is even more radical than the older generation Taliban. I mean, they want military victory, and so it just depends. I think, you know, any kind of sectarian, whether it's religious, ethnic, regional government, could not work in Afghanistan for sure. It would just mean endless civil war. If it can't work in Egypt or, for example, Tunisia or other places, it can't work there. So hopefully, and it looks like the US is working with Pakistan, and Pakistan has a lot of influence on the Taliban. let's just hope, but I am not sure. I don't really know. This I know that, you know, every segment, all the people, most of the people are sick and tired of war and violence and insecurity and lawlessness and a culture of impunity and you know, losing things. The World Bank, economically we think we're building the country, but the World Bank came out with a report saying this occupation has cost the country $240 billion in terms of orchards, gardens, lands, bridges, roads, etc. Things have been wrecked completely. So we will just have to see. We just hope. You know, I mean, you know, I keep going. I could get killed. I know, and it's very difficult sometimes because I know some expatriates who are very excited, very hopeful, very optimistic initially, have sort of been demoralized. It's very hard to maintain the momentum, the energy, and the engagement. But you know, I can't just abandon the country now and whatever it could mean. And if things go all right, a year from now, I will report to you again. Yes, Jean.
Well, there's always these two basic conversations in the left around war or military occupation. One is pulling troops out, and the other is what to support of some resistance within a country. And you know, there was that debate around Egypt and Syria, and the occupations, you know, with the IRA and other. Historically, there's been something kind of to support, at least ambivalently, in resisting an occupation. And do you see anything there to support at the grassroots level in terms of resistance to the occupation? I mean,
You mean resisting the occupation?
Yeah, resisting the occupation within Afghanistan.
Yeah, my driver.
I think our role is to support, and we do this on KBU and other community media.
My sense is at this point, as I said, even the Afghans who work for our project, and there are maybe at least 100 of them, whose livelihood, like our gardener, our maid, our driver, our bodyguards, etc., we pay these people. And I know most of those people would really like us to leave, even the civilian part, because people are now beginning to see that
even though the economy could collapse.
Even though the economy could collapse and even though there could be a civil war. But people are saying the occupation has done more damage than has done good. Because it's very hard to point to it, because and they will say the government is corrupt, it's ineffective, inefficient, and it's thievery. It's a government of thieves. It's a kleptocracy. But that's because of the foreigners. They protect this government. They brought the government, they protect them with all of these tanks and soldiers and helicopters and drones and so forth. Or if they would say more than half of the labor force, so you have college graduates with no work. You know, 70% of the population are under 25. 70. Wow. It's a very young nation. And more than half the people now are unemployed, you can imagine.
How many of them are political in some sense?
There's a lot of politics. There are even, you know. So, but no one has given any thought to this, you know. So we keep opening, or we keep allowing private enterprises to open schools and universities and institutes and courses and that, without any thought about what are these people going to be doing. This is going to be a time bomb, you know. This is the intellectual proletariat. So in general, and I know people of all walks really are sick and tired of the occupation. Initially, they were welcome because they were tired of the Taliban. But now, the situation is such in every way that this is this bad, and I really have heard people, even women, some women who have said, you know, at least we were not violated, we were not as threatened, you know, we were not in danger. We didn't have freedom, but we were secure. So, I mean, people are nostalgic now about the Taliban or the communist era, which was...
the 60s, you mean like that?
No, the 70s.
70s.
Yes. So, 78 to 80s, 92. So, but at the same time, you know, as I said, our maid who changes our sheets and does our laundry, she will have no way to live if it weren't for this work. It's this kind of thing. And as I said, you know, we haven't created any real jobs where people can continue. And money, foreign aid, etc., is following the troops. Already, people can see a reduction in budgets of, say, these organizations and NGOs that are trying to work on water or irrigation or with women or orphans, etc., etc.
Can you talk a little bit about U.S. forces and whether they really intend to lead? I know you and I had a conversation about planned underdevelopment, and I've talked about maintaining countries in a state of chaos. That I believe that the United States actually purposely does that with nations like Somalia with its plans, like bringing in the Ethiopian to settle it, when they know that will cause much greater upheaval and difficulty. And so can you talk a little bit about this supposed withdrawal of troops? And because we know that the generals have been saying 2017 now. We know they're planning 9 bases in that giant ministry. So, you know, can you just talk a little bit about that issue? Are we really even intending to get out, and will we allow it to stabilize?
Well, what's happening on the ground, at one point there were 400 bases in the country, foreign bases. The size of Texas, 400 bases, because there were troops, you know, about 130,000, 40,000 from nearly 50 different countries. Some of these bases now have been abandoned, or worse still, this is my favorite. As we speak now, the Pentagon is spending $2 billion to scrap $7 billion worth of weaponry. Right there. And you can see pictures of it. So, which is incredible. It's mind-boggling. And then as I was coming here at Riverdale School, there was a sign today, they have a car wash and bake sale. And it just, I kept thinking, you know, well, why doesn't the Pentagon do this? Or what would, it's very strange that the school has to do this, and this is a rich school, you know.
I was going to say, while we're impoverished,
right.
I mean, while we're
anyway,
impoverishing our people to do
but at the same time, the occupation forces know that they're not welcome. It's no wonder that so many of them, nearly 70 of them, have been killed by their own trainees, Afghan trainees, or their own counterparts. Some right in the Ministry of Education, some right in the airport lounge, some right in their training places. So, and they say, well, it's infiltrators. But, so I think the occupiers know that they have overstayed their, you know, they were overstayed. And the Afghans, as desperate as they may be and as dependent as they are, I think also in a way very stubborn and very patriotic, very nationalistic, and have a lot of pride. You know, now it's becoming apparent that the foreigners are running the country. The joke in Afghanistan is that there are 4 centers of power. The first is ISAF, the second is the US Embassy, the third are the NGOs, fourth are the Afghan government, in that order. And this is rather, you can see this, you know, in so many ways. So I think people, but also, as I said, the war is essentially lost. Someday, when someone writes the true history of this war, this will come out, that the US lost. It was lost from the beginning. It was a stupid idea to go to begin with, in my view. And as Cornelius would say, we now have a war criminal as president and a warmonger who outdoes Bush. So it's clear that, you know, the Afghans don't want the occupation, whether you're an academic or a CIA or special forces, these people who grab people, you know, or shoot them in the middle of the night raiders and so forth. And the foreigners know the war has been lost, but I don't think I have always said that the US will never completely leave that country or that area, especially with lithium. And Afghanistan apparently is sitting on top of lithium. So it's in all of these things, in this, you know, and everything. So I think the strategy seems to be to reduce the visibility of the international forces, and also other countries don't want to. They didn't want to enter this conflict. Some countries have left entirely. You know, they've taken their forces. There's no support from other countries or other governments even. Just as the American public and the American Senate, you know, are overwhelmingly against this occupation. So I think what they're going to do is increase special forces. The CIA is going to be, the CIA has become a fighting force. It's not intelligence, or not just intelligence. It's also a fighting force. And then you have these special forces. And then they say, well, 10,000 troops, maybe 15,000 just as advisors and trainees. Just as the way we do it all the time, you know, in Vietnam and other places. So I think, and then they will train this proxy army, the Afghan, who would fight for the American because they're paid. And imagine, you know, Blackwater and DynCorp retired police officers training the police and the army. You can imagine the character of that army and that police and that intelligence force. So I think there will always be an American, if not a NATO presence. And it's not just Afghanistan. You have to think about China. And you have to think about Iran. I think the US and Israel are dying to attack Iran. And they will attack Iran. One way or another. There will be a war in Iran. I can predict that. So because of the Afghan situation and the regional and the global struggle for energy and resources, I can imagine American presence for many years to come. Dunford, in fact, I was reading Paulo, an Afghan news thing. Today, Dunford, the head of the NATO forces, yesterday was saying that the Afghan army is not, now they're saying the Afghan army is not ready, you know, to defend the country. Defend the country from itself. So.
You know, I wanted to notice, I know Jill wants a question, and I noticed that it's 8 o'clock, and we've got other people who want questions. I'm wondering how we want to carry.
I will be brief, so
that's all right, but
half a minute.
We'll let the questions happen, but I'm wondering if people want to, if it's okay, we can stay till 9, because we haven't even broken for tea and food. So
up to you.
Time is now 8.
It's 8 right now, so.
Maybe shoot for 8:30.
Well, that's what we were shooting for,
Yes,
and
fine,
we can
fine.
just break at the end for the food and stuff if we
Yeah,
want to do that.
that
Just
might be
keep
good.
going. Okay, great. So go ahead,
Yeah.
whoever, next
I
question.
will try to be brief. So.
So
No, you're
I see
fine.
me and Michael, and then,
Okay.
so let's see.
Yes.
So I guess if I can, I'm not trying to be unrealistic, especially given what you just said. I'm just wondering, what would be a situation that you would hope for that would be kind of a best case scenario, and then related to that, how would people in the U.S. would we have any relationship with that best case scenario for what we could do? to help
I think
contribute?
we have to,
Yes.
we don't decide. We have a problem here, decision making. I think the situation needs to be demilitarized and very serious and intense work on reconciliation and peace and reconstruction. I think all of the military intelligence and these so-called advisors should leave the country ASAP. But I think there should be a civilian force, not from the United States alone, but from more or less neutral countries, including some Muslim countries. And I think there has to be a long-term commitment, maybe like a 20, 30-year guaranteed Marshall Plan for the reconstruction of the country. But I think you do need, or a UN peacekeeping force, as I keep saying, I've said this for 12 years, why we don't put a UN peacekeeping force from different countries, which would be much cheaper, much more effective, and less troublesome. But it's a mystery why that's not done. So I think we need some kind of a peace and stability force, but not Western or American. And we need to commit to rebuilding the country, and including the rebuilding of the political system, the cultural system, the institutions, and the economy, of course. You know, and serious work on health and education and agriculture, these three areas which have been ignored completely. And again, as I said, we need to move away from military solution to other non-military solutions. And train massive numbers of Afghans in the country and send them abroad. I've been saying this for the last 12 years. Now they're beginning to send Afghans, but when you send them, no one comes back. The more interesting thing was about a month ago, 6 weeks ago, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs asked all of the diplomats to come back for some kind of orientation and seminars. Only 5 showed up. The Afghan diplomats, from ambassadors to consulars, etc., they're not interested in coming back. And the same thing happens when they send people to study abroad. Half of them, you know, defect. It's a serious problem. But I keep saying, even if a fourth of them come back, that would be fine. You know, it's worth it. Yes.
Oh, you said that you believe that Iran will be attacked, and I'm
Yes.
wondering why you believe that, and who would.
The U.S. and Israel, together or
So,
alone, one of them.
react to-
Because the U.S., as you know, has a history of not tolerating or standing apathy governments and people in nations. Anyone who stand up, just look what happened in the last 2 or 3 years. You know, so Saddam Hussein, Gaddafi, not that those are good people. You know, the same would happen with Iran. Iran has been a thorn, and Iran is a very rich country. It's fairly developed, and it will fight to the bitter end. And Israel and the United States, and there's a lot of oil, but also because of the threat of Iranian hegemony over the Gulf states. For these reasons, I think it's just a matter of time. Already there's CIA and CIA proxies in Iran, as some of you know. They are trying to subvert the system. You know, I think Washington just doesn't like people with turbans and beards, especially if they're nationalistic and want to use their own resources. Just the way, you know, we didn't like Hugo Chavez or Castro or the Sandinistas. Some of us were interested in the Sandinistas at one point. It's today, the state, the White House man, this talking head of the White House says, today he says, yes, we thought about the Egypt situation, but we decided that it's not in the best interest of the United States to call this a coup.
Right.
It's not, everything is from our interest, to hell with everybody else.
It's all euphemism.
Yeah.
It's
If the
not-
whole world can go to hell, but if it's not against, if it's against our interest, we will choose a different position. People see that. Other people can understand that. This is the point. Only Americans can and won't. Yes.
Yeah, I don't want to take the tangent for me going to Iran, though I think I would have some disagreement with you. I think it's highly likely that Israel will undertake some strikes with the United States tacit support, but I would be personally very surprised if there was a major air or ground force commitment
I hope
from the
you're
United
right.
States. And I don't think that's naive. I think it's realistic. We're almost bankrupt as it is with Iraq and Afghan experiences.
They haven't
Um,
thought of that.
No, but it
Iran
comes
can
to-
be, Iranians will fight to the bitter end, as I
Yes,
say.
and I think we're. Yeah.
That would be
But
the only
my
deterrence.
question was actually one of more hopefulness.
Yeah.
Well, 70% under the age of 25.
Yeah.
Everyone tired of war, everyone tired of corruption, everyone tired of unemployment. The simple question is, who do the youth look for as role models and icons within the country?
Yeah.
And might those people serve as the yeast that might leaven the bread?
Yeah.
And that's kind of put into a context of my memory of Khan Abdul Ghaffar Khan.
Yeah. Yes.
You know, when I went for a month to Afghanistan way back,
Yeah.
it was to meet the frontier gunman,
Yes. Yes.
Pashtun,
Yes.
committed to nonviolence.
Yes. 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 There's a
Clean
film about him too.
beyond reproach,
Yes. Yes.
beyond any complaint of corruption whatsoever.
Yes.
Surely there are a few such people, maybe not quite as famous
Yes. Yes.
today, that the youth are aware of,
Yeah.
they look to. Is there hope that, not from expats like yourself,
Yeah.
or from NGOs,
Right.
or other well-meaning outsiders, but from within the country
Yes,
there would be
yes.
a moral force
Yes.
supported by the youth?
Yeah. There are some men and women. There are actually some women, very outspoken women. Barakzai, for example, a couple of women in the parliament who are members of the parliament, or civic organizations. The problem is that power, whether it's through the government or even the contracts, this war economy, or now some of these political parties and people who are posturing, we're all part of the same ruling clique. And they are very prominent because they have television stations, they have radio stations, they have newspapers, they have money because they have stolen a lot of money, but they're also sponsored by foreigners. They're like proxies for this intelligence service or that intelligence service. So they won't let other younger, new people to emerge. But there are people, some women, as I said, like Fawzia Koufi or Ramazan Bashar Dost, if you have heard the name. He's a member of the parliament, a Ph.D. in political economy from France. Brilliant man, was Minister of Planning and wanted to kick the NGOs out because he said they do more harm than good. So he lost the ministry and he's a member of the parliament. There are a few individuals, but it's very difficult to become prominent because somehow something happens to you. Somehow things happen. People either get beat up, disappear, or get killed, when they're too outspoken and show sort of a populist streak. So, but there are a few individuals, and I think when there are real, genuine elections or real political parties, this is the thing that Karzai does not allow political parties because he knew. He doesn't want any, he wants to control all of the political process and political power himself. But I think, people will emerge. There are a few individuals, some in the universities. I don't know if it was covered in the US press, but the Kabul University, which is an 80-year-old university, was shut down by the students and the professors for 3 weeks. And so the government would not allow the press to enter. And it made it very difficult for the university people to get out. So they said, all right, you're not letting the press in, and you're making things difficult because you have to have a permit to demonstrate, so we'll do it. And so they shut down the university for 3 weeks and have a list of demands that I hope to translate. Incidentally, I don't mean to do self-promotion because I'm not looking for anything, but if you Google my name with, what is it?
It's not your...
Tumblr.
That's what I said.
Google my name in Tumblr, you will see my reports for the last 5 years. Anyway, there is hope. There are people, if and when there's opportunity, that they can emerge, without any threats. Good journalists get killed, especially women. Women writers, journalists, and speakers, and sort of populist public figures. This is a problem.
You talked about demilitarizing being one of the things in answer to what Jill said, like one of the kinds of goals that we could be having here as Americans is be saying, we need to pull our military out, we need to demilitarize our position there. But I'd hoped we'd get to talk about a little bit tonight, and I'm sort of hoping to redirect it as to what's happened to anti-war activism. I have a lot of thoughts about that. Paul Cienfuegos wrote me, he couldn't be here tonight. He was saying, well, in a country where it's a false democracy and you know that what you ask for, the government is corrupt, it's bought and sold, and it doesn't have an interest in ending a war, and there's no reason to, and people know that, and so they get stuck. So that was one kind of thing he said, but I don't believe we are without conscience. I don't believe that, as citizens throughout, we don't have the ability to feel compassion if we could see the images or meet the people or know the truth. But for some reason, we are very quiescent in this country right now. I think Obama's election has a lot to do with it. People don't tend to protest someone they vote for. But I want to throw out, what is your perspective on that? What are you guys seeing? How are you feeling?
Linda, I just want to acknowledge, I think, are you Pierre?
Yeah, hi Pierre.
That Pierre had a question before you
okay,
just so you know.
No, actually, I was just going to respond.
Yeah, great, go for it.
I think that many of our leaders right now are some of the greatest war criminals of all time, as far as modern history written by Europeans. And I think that there is a lot of people that don't understand what's going on, and obviously listening to you speak, you're talking about things that you really, really have to search for and know what you're looking for to even shed light on some of the issues that you're speaking of. And I see a country, the United States of America, that was founded on for the most part, some sort of Christian type principles that, in a very offensive way, still touts that image, but actually doesn't respect that at all, going into countries where their faith is just as strong and is actually completely imbued in the fabric of their society, and they're entirely waking to sleeping lives. And these countries that are going in there have absolutely no respect for their culture, have no respect for their faith, and that's even here in the U.S., we have church bells that are allowed to ring, and then Muslims aren't allowed to have an audible call to prayer. So the fact that these countries would go into those places talking about freedom, justice, and peace, which are businesses, they made them businesses, is just ludicrous. And people were bringing up, like, what do we do? I think obviously you have to fight imperialism in any way possible, at any time possible, not just when it's convenient to you. So that, in this country, people that are well-traveled have brought up to me, and I'm sure to yourself as well, that our country watches our citizens more than any other country in the world. Because they're more afraid of us than they are afraid of anyone hiding in a cave in Afghanistan. So we need to take that fear, just like they use that fear to create an illusion of power for us. We don't even need an illusion. We are the power here. And people don't seem to really get that. That being said, I'm wondering, you speaking about what you're speaking about, obviously the powers that be are letting you be here and do this, otherwise there'd be a drone flying by right now. But what is your... I hope I didn't jinx you there. What is your motivation? What is your motivation in, like, spreading this awareness to people? That's what I want to know.
How to put it? I really have had a different... I mean, I was raised differently by my family, and I was educated differently by my institutions. In other words, really, and without bragging, you know, I was lucky to be sort of told that I should do good and that I should make a difference in the world. And I feel that way. And that's why, you know, a year ago I gave a 10-year professorship at a fairly decent institution. I gave it up voluntarily. I said, this, I'm not challenged enough. I want a bigger challenge. That's what I told people. I'm not bitter, I'm not angry, I'm not defeated, I'm not tired, I'm not sick. I just need a bigger challenge so I can make a bigger difference. So my motivation, I mean, it's really, whatever it sounds sort of pompous, compassion, because what I've seen and what I see when I arrive there next Thursday, you have never seen such misery. I mean, you see people, I see my own, the people I have known, my friends, my associates, my relatives, who were younger than me but look much older than me. Or you see people where between their skin and their bones, there's nothing between their skin and their bones, there's no flesh. You see young people with all of their teeth gone, for example. You see people who are hungry. You see, I've never seen so many beggars. You know, children, women, men, decent-looking people, etc. And the fear, you know. So call it compassion, call it a moral outrage, call it a sense of obligation, call it whatever. I mean, and you know, I try to transfer money too. You know, I'm not interested in, you know, planning my retirement and this and that. I don't believe in that. And my hope is that, you know, here, frankly, it amazes me. I'm just astounded about the indifference, the self-centeredness, and but also the self-righteousness and the arrogance of most Americans, of course. Present company. Yes, no, there are good people. I've known there are even good people who have helped me. That's why I'm here. And these were Americans who helped me. So, I mean, my motivation is I want to reduce suffering, whatever it might be, whether it's in Portland or in Kabul. Especially unnecessary pain and suffering and misery and so forth. It bothers me very deeply. All the time. It just never leaves me, you know. And I'm not, you know, just concerned about Muslim countries or just Afghanistan. I'm concerned about here, you know, too, for northeast Portland or southeast Portland. You know, I was driving the other day, you know, on Division Street, and it's like a different part of, it's like you're in a different country. You know, Division Street, the further out you go, it looks different. Someone, a friend was telling me the other day around Reed College, people buying these $500,000 homes, tearing them down and building a bigger one. You know, this is true. So I'm just amazed, as you said, you know, where is the moral outrage? I mean, you know, where is our humanity? I wish people were good Christians, because my sense of Christianity is that you do good. You know, you do no harm, do good. Well, but even that is gone. I mean, I don't know what is happening. Frankly speaking, I see most Americans as morally and intellectually crippled and disabled. Whether that's by design, I'm not even surprised if it is by design. And if nothing else, if Americans can't get angry about this surveillance, the police state, you know, I don't know if we're surveilled now, you know, but as you know, are we a threat to national security? Are we aiding the enemy? Are we engaged in espionage? I mean, what is this? This is an insult. Americans should be insulted. How dare you insult my intelligence and my integrity like that I can't even speak, you know. And I am asked to inform on my coworkers to see strange behavior. So if I'm reading something like I'm reading Common Dreams or Amy Goodman, that would be strange behavior. Do I have reason then to fear? What is going on here? And every now and then, sometime when I get on Delta airline, the pilot would come on and say, and we have some troops returning from Kabul, and people have applauded. This happened more than twice when we were airborne. And I just looked around and I say, do I jump out of the window? Do I get up? And I say, I know I would be mobbed, you know, if I said something like say, you know. So anyway, that's what I think.
I know Carl has his hand up. I'm wondering, is there anybody that hasn't asked a question that wanted to ask a question?
Or has a comment?
No offense to you.
Where do we want to go with the rest of this?
What?
Just what you originally, Linda, were speaking of having us discuss.
Can you speak up, Jack? It's hard to hear
Okay, you were speaking of, you know, deal with what Zaher has said, but then we talk about where we wanted to go with this, right?
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, I do think, I mean, I think that's one of the questions. What do we do? I mean, my activism is mostly through my radio show at this stage in my life. I mean, and because of physical things and stuff, I'll go to marches, but I can only do about half of them, you know, so things like that. So, but everybody in this room is an activist. Everybody in this room has a constituency. Everybody here reaches other people, and everybody here has, you know, lived a large portion of their lives doing that kind of thing. If indeed we're seeing an America grow more and more numb, you know, I mean, I have a lot of different thoughts about it, but what do we do? I mean, I have a lot of thoughts about why we're numb. I do think the false democracy makes a difference. People, you know, bought hope. I think our whole cultural media, the way that we're told who we are by all media, even just comedy shows and TVs, and the way that we're portrayed is very false. And so I think all of that has to do with the numbing of us. And I do think that I'd love someone to speak about it. I think Obama's presidency has been the worst thing possible for people rising up and opposing our government. I think but we do need to do things, and I don't have any answers. I don't have any answers. I mean, I really don't.
You mentioned that it's difficult to oppose a president you voted for.
Psychologically, it's cognitive dissonance.
At the same time, I mean, going back, Johnson won a landslide victory. And by 1968, he had to withdraw. And I think, if anything, it opens up the possibility of seeing how corrupt it is. So for people who had hope and seeing that is indeed a false hope, I think there's an enormous opportunity there. Now, how we deal with that, how we work with that, is a challenge. But I'm not in despair of that. I think there's.
That's a good point.
don't you think most of the numbness is really coming from ourselves? Our own fears? I mean, we could be, more tax resistors. We could be more out in the streets. We could be taking risks like you are when you go back to Afghanistan. It might not be quite as dangerous a place here, but don't underestimate the danger if you're perceived as sufficiently radical.
I know, I've seen my
Why
file.
aren't we in this room perceived as sufficiently radical? Why don't we have a drone expectation of surveillance, if not worse? Why should we not welcome that? That's the kind of commitment I think that's necessary to bring about change. Most people are numb. Most of us are probably numb most of the time, but I think the numbness is not just the media to blame, Obama to blame, the culture to blame. All that's true. It's also ourselves to blame because we're afraid of losing our home. We're afraid of losing our job. These are all legitimate fears. But if we're going to be ruled by those fears, don't be surprised that you're numb and unable to really bring about the change that's necessary. I think we need to take it back to ourselves. And you have. You've left your tenured job. I respect that. You're going back to the country of your birth to do what little bit you can do.
Yeah.
Your widow's mite in Christian terms. Your little bit. We all need to do that. At risk.
And it's fighting the empire, whether it's at that end or at this end. So, I mean, I have the privilege of, say, having an American passport there. So if they don't like me, they will take me to the airport, although that would be difficult.
Right.
So, but in terms of analysis and things, you know, I mean, I speak, I say all kinds of things that other people can't say and won't say. So people who are here, I think, should fight. We are dealing with the new imperialism, which is both domestic and foreign. So, but as I said, I'm just amazed. I'm just amazed at the docility here. What will it take to make people angry? But you know, I mean, nothing seems to matter.
We did see an uprising. We saw an uprising around Occupy. I'll throw that out there. And there are many people from the Occupy movement that have gone forward into other movements and doing other activities. So, I mean, and we saw the Arab Spring, and we're seeing the fallout from it. Is that something that could happen here?
I don't know. Somebody.
A larger, bigger movement?
Do things have to get worse before they get better, or what will it take to motivate large numbers to live in a tent for a month, or 2 months out there, you know?
Well, I think Johnson would not have needed to withdraw if he was able to say, as Obama has said, that he's going to have all of our troops out in less than a year. So that to me is a very astute way of neutralizing opposition, is to hold out that hope and make that promise that you don't have to do anything, it'll take care of itself, just wait.
Yeah.
But I also think we're living in a time, it's kind of, I think, this sort of sense of moral uncertainty in postmodern climate that I think the internet fosters, which is that there's no absolute truth, there's no absolute right or wrong, and there's a lot of good we're doing in Afghanistan, and there's, you know, it's not black or white. Whereas when you saw napalm dropping on you know, villages in South and North Vietnam, it seemed like there was a very clear black and white.
Well, that's where the media made a difference. The change in media made a big difference.
Drones are starting to penetrate the consciousness, but again, we don't see video footage like we did in the war in Vietnam. We don't. It's not on TV. The bodies.
The body.
And when that one story, I believe it was some video footage that Bradley Manning leaked out that was released, and showing bodies being killed by a helicopter attack on an Afghanistan village. that was hugely, appallingly pushed back by the government, because they could see what bad PR that was. If only we could have more of that on television with every drone strike.
Not with the corporate.
But yeah, so we're not getting the vivid, in-your-face reporting that we did in the Vietnam period, unfortunately.
I think moral outrage and anger toward ourselves and comrades in the left or the country has its place, but I think it only goes so far, and I tend to rely more on also speaking to the fears and sense of helplessness in people, and that there is a better world, that there are a lot of ways in which this country falls very low on indicators of prosperity and quality of life, and that we could do much better. I think many of us work in media, radio, or videography. I think one small thing we might do is to have some kind of sister-brother relationship with a radio station there, of maybe young activists or videographers. I mean, I would be interested in doing something like that, because I don't know, it just feels a bit bombastic to just be outraged. Yeah, we are where we are, but what can, are there some projects we can do to support what you're going in a week? Is there some way we could connect with young radio stations?
I can do that for you in a few hours. Yeah, because I mean, it's sort of like you can hardly find anything in the American. The media is part of the problem. It's our enemy. I mean, obviously, but there are a few outlets, as you all know, you're part of it.
Mention
So
Paulo again.
it's the political lies, it's the military lies. I think Islamophobia has something to do with it. If you can project any kind of insurgency and nationalistic movement as sort of fanatic, Muslims, backward and anti-modern, etc., it appeals to the American sentiment, basically. The Eurocentrism, Islamophobia, and racism that is unfortunately built into the very fabric of our makeups in our institutions. And then the very slick lies, coming out from Washington, So Petraeus, he has no problem, Of all the places, he's hired by CUNY, $200,000 a year. City University of New York.
Really?
Yes. So, and apparently he works 3 or 4 hours. Todd, you should try to find a job like that. So.
Well, are you saying it would not be possible, given the militarizing, the repressive?
But there are people who are struggling. Believe me, there are bands, Afghan bands playing rap, music, or there are publications, there are channels, because both the foreigners and the Afghan government are not quite capable to control all things everywhere. So there are avenues, and there are channels, and there are opportunities, and that's why I think Americans should try to. And it's not just Afghanistan. As I said, this is not the first invasion; it will not be the last one. We all know that. Given the logic of things, quote unquote. So Americans need to sort of learn about other people and other people's problems and interests.
And there are capacities there.
There's a lot of capacity, and there are brilliant people. For example, my students, the first 1 or 2 groups, none of them could type. They had never touched a computer. Now everyone is computer literate before they come to us. And you meet people, men and women, who are very smart, very worldly, very angry, very impatient. They want to do things, and they take risks, but there's no support.
Yeah.
Because there too, it's divide and rule, divide and rule.
Yeah.
Pit this group against that, pit these people against this language, that religion. And this is one thing I work on a lot. It's part of my my hidden agenda, is to urge people to get along, quote unquote,
Yeah.
And recognize the common enemy. And I say, do class analysis, don't do religious analysis, but do class analysis and see, the ruling class and the kleptocracy. So But I think more Americans, you know, Code Pink, they went a couple of times, one or two people, you went. We have people like Sarah Chase, I don't know if anyone knows her, the NPR woman, who was NPR, and NPR was censoring her reports from Afghanistan initially, so she left NPR and is now helping Afghan women to do in Kandahar, to do fragrance things, you know, toiletry things, soap, etc., from local herbs and things like that. And she's an amazing woman. She dresses like an Afghan man, and she wears a turban. But she drives around in Kandahar, of all places, all these years, you know. No one touches her now because she has established herself as somebody who's concerned and who's trying to do good, you know, and taking risks.
Who is Sister
Sarah Chase. Sarah Chase.
She has a great book.
And she has a book, Punishment of Virtue. Yeah. So, you know, I think we need to do outreach there, but also we need to educate Americans about America's problem. As I keep saying, look, Detroit is going bankrupt. Schools class sizes are out of control. People are leaving teaching. I mean, what can we say? Portland, half of the people are really poor in a way. And it's a paradox.
What happens when gasoline hits $8 a gallon?
Yes.
Well, in this war machine,
then people will say, go invade, it's our oil. It just happens to be in Iran.
But it needs gasoline to get there. You need oil to fight a war too.
Yes, yes. So I think, I don't know. I mean, I tried. I tried here for 40 years and I didn't think I made much difference. So I chose another arena. And I chose another arena to see if I can have an impact there. It's not that I'm suicidal, you know, or naive or whatever, but, you know, I can't not do something, whatever it might be. And maybe I have a better audience, more recipient people there.
You know, I'm going to bring the evening to an official end because that was a perfect end statement. A radio person recognizes when their guest says the perfect end statement. and you just did. That doesn't mean you all have to leave. That's, of course, up to the host of the house and that, but I did want to acknowledge we've gone past our 8:30 time, and there's so much more to discuss that I'm happy for people to stay as long as they want, but I'm going to say we are officially...
Yeah, maybe another 15, 20 minutes.
Okay. Yeah.
Thank you, Jen.
Okay, good. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I keep finding myself wanting to find a way to get this. I do radio, so I don't give people images except what I can upload on a not really well-working website. And so, but I keep thinking of images work on me. People's voices and images work on me, and so that's one thing I kind of want to throw out here for everybody to think about is how can we, given that our largest medias have been completely corrupted in terms of actually showing us what's happening in the world, how can we get those visceral, and I don't mean it's like I want to show everyone blood and guts, it could be a beautiful little child doing something lovely, but we need to make Afghanistan real to people here in this country. We need to touch people where they feel things.
And I think
the other media knows that. That's what they do all the time. They're constantly trying to make us feel things from their direction. I don't want to make people feel false things. I want them to see the reality of life.
And not from a stance of condescension. I mean, when I did two projects in Sierra Leone, and our aim was to show how young people can learn from young people there. Not
people
generating
everywhere.
this one-way conversation based on some sense of largesse, which is sort of the NGO, I guess, approach. But that young people can learn a lot from the strategies of survival and the creativity of people, and the trauma, but also the resilience of people under very difficult circumstances. And so I like this idea of kind of sister relationships, and I don't know if you have a list that's gone around.
Hopefully, I was pulled away from it when we had to start, so it's over
there. A lot
there.
of us are involved with schools and media, and
well, I mean, you know, I will be there, and you can write to me. I'm happy to facilitate these things.
Yeah, I think that would be great.
I had another
Make sure
thought,
you have
I was
this
gonna say I had
email.
another thought recently, which was actually inspired by this year, this month is the 50th anniversary of the March on Washington, right, with Dr. King and Beard Rustin and everybody. And I had heard, and I didn't get to see it, that there was a traveling exhibit, you know, this is kind of a limited thing, but a traveling exhibit at the museum downtown. And so I had thought, because I think I maybe could have been a historian, thought of having a museum exhibit, you know, like you just have to have, you know, a physical place where we would show in body and form, you know,
So
what's
like a
actually
gallery
going on in
presentation,
Afghanistan.
yeah.
You
I
know,
think
just like to
that's
have it more real for us.
Like an installation.
Right, exactly, an installation, since we don't see the media reporting what's happening. So anyway, that was a thought I had a couple weeks
That's
ago.
a really interesting
Yeah,
idea.
Yeah.
It's a nice idea.
And it's three-dimensional, but
Yeah,
it's only
no,
one
I'm
of
liking
many
that idea.
ideas. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know what it would take, you know. I mean, if people don't care about the collapse of the environment around them,
Right.
clearly it doesn't show in our behavior.
Well, it might
know,
also
like
be
the-
overwhelming. See, that's the other thing
Yeah.
we have to talk about, that people are very aware that the environment is heading, you know, we hit 400, 350.org, we hit 400. I mean, I do think sometimes there's so much that is also a paralytic, and we have to find ways to act into it. Do you know what I mean?
Yes, but I mean, it's a sort of paradoxical. This country, which has so many resources, which is so rich, where are so many intelligent people, so many avenues, and a sense of power, but at the same time, people feel like they can't do anything, you know?
I know.
I keep telling my students, I say, the shopping mall, the credit card, these are your enemies. You know, the commercials.
I actually think they are. I think you're right.